Let's get right into it, South Bay. Today's guest is a recently retired police officer, Captain Vince Osorio. Served 30 years in the Gardena Police Department, city in the South Bay. Vince and I met at tragedy. Unfortunately, one of his fellow officers and my client and dear friend, Toshio Harai, passed away in a motorcycle accident on his way to work in 2018. About a year or two later, he was commemorated in the state capitol of Sacramento with a medal, a name plaque for fallen officers. And that's where I met Vince. You and I connected. Vince, what can you remember from that particular day that we were at his ceremony?
Well, first, thanks for having me on here. Like you said, that's when we first met. I think I met Eddie just before that.
Mm-hmm.
But the things I remember about the commemoration, obviously there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and there's a lot of emotions that go behind it. Losing Toshio was probably the worst day in my career. I can still remember that entire morning. But getting back to the ceremony in the state capitol, again, we met there, and you saw how many people were there,
Yeah.
and how many officers were being remembered just from being lost in 2018, along with all of the previous officers. I spent, along with my 30 at Gardena, I spent 20 years on our honor guard. So I went to a lot of police funerals, in addition to the other special occasions and stuff. But, one of the reasons I stayed on the honor guard for so long, was that it was my way of helping to remember guys and girls who had died in the line of duty. Obviously, this time we were going to commemorate Toshio. We took a lot of our department members up there, and we were able, and along with his family, and we were able to, through a lot of work, not only by the police department, but by our mutual friend Mike Sargent. Mike worked his butt off to get Toshio on that wall.
Oh, yeah.
And it thankfully it happened. And I think the one thing I will always take away from that day is, just there's a lot of pride involved, but a lot of, I guess, satisfaction that Toshio is actually being remembered on the memorial wall.
Oh, yeah. I had never experienced something like that. I didn't know that a civilian can participate in a ceremony like that. So I am eternally grateful that I was able to be there to celebrate him too. Obviously we're all sad, and it didn't happen right away because of COVID. So you had to kind of wait a little bit of time before he was commemorated. And so all the fallen officers up until that time, when they reestablished it, they were there. So you're right, it was a huge ceremony. But it was such a sad thing, but at the same time, just being around his family, being around individuals like you were so caring, you and your wife. It was just an instant connection, man. I really felt comfortable. You always looked out, made sure that we were okay. Eddie was doing all the shooting. And speaking of Eddie, he's not here with us, not because he doesn't want to. He's just a little under the weather. Oh. But we do have some questions from him. So okay. He's still here. Like all entrepreneurs, the show must go on. Yeah. Right. But, in tragedy, we both lost a brother, but I truly feel that at that moment, I gained a brother in you, because I was able to see just how much you cared for him. You made sure that his family was okay. You guys were a team effort. You weren't on top. You were just there. It's just weird, because sometimes people support you, and that support sometimes becomes overwhelming. But for you, you did it in such a way, maybe it's because of all your experience and because you've been to so many of these things, that you were such a calming presence, your wife and I. You really made an impact on me. And, at the time you were shaving your head, so you weren't a customer, and I didn't know where this was going to be, but I'm so glad that now, fast forward to you retiring, you did 30 years on the force in Gardena. Man, let me ask you, first of all, what made you want to be a police officer to begin with?
I don't know what the exact motivation was, or when I made the decision. I do have a couple little things though. I think it was around 2000. I was already a cop. I'd been with the department at that time for about 5 years, and it's Christmas time, and my mom gave me a cassette tape. We might have to do a separate podcast to explain what that is, but so she gave me a cassette tape and for Christmas, and I go, "Mom, what is this?" And she goes, "Just listen to it." So we had to go find a tape player. We finally found one, and I had, my wife was there. I think my daughter was about 12 or 13, and then we had actually she was a little older than that, and then we had our son Nico also. But so I play it, and you can tell it's 2 or 3 kids running around, and it ends up being myself and my 2 brothers, and you can hear it progressing, and then it sounds like it turns into cops and robbers. And then one of the kids says, "Get your hands up, you're under arrest." Right? And my mom said, "I saved this tape. I didn't know you were going to end up being a police officer, but here it is."
Oh,
and it was just like, wow.
That was beautiful. Aren't you grateful, right? So typically, sometimes we think, man, like, I'm a parent. We save stuff. I mean, she held on to that thing for, how long did she have it before?
Oh God, I was 25 when I got hired, so she had it for at least, I don't know, 20 years.
Wow. So you were longer. 5 with your brother?
Yeah, I was like 5 or 6 when it happened.
Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy.
I want to see that tape. So, and being in law enforcement for so long, so did you always knew you were going to be a captain? Like, how does one start that? Like, I get it, you become a police officer, but being a captain, that's a very coveted position, but it's also a very difficult position to get to because it's such a small amount of individuals that qualify to be that. So you have to work really hard. Right. What was that like to become a captain?
Well, it wasn't always one of those things that I wanted to do. For me, a lot of it was timing. Obviously you have to work different jobs and get a lot of different experience. And then, when tests come up, you take the test, and then hopefully you do well enough to get promoted. I had to test to be a sergeant, then a lieutenant, and then, obviously captain. But the process is, normally a test process is, maybe a written test. You do a few oral boards, and then you might have, a final interview with either the chief or, city manager or whatever. In our case, we went through a couple of different boards, an inside panel with citizens on it, an outside panel with some chiefs. And then our testing process was a little weird because it was in January of 2020. So we basically finished 3/4 of the testing, and then in March it got shut down because of COVID. So we had to wait until I think it was September of that year to finally finish the testing and do all that stuff, and then promotions happen.
So did you pick up right where you left off in the testing process, or did you have to start all over?
Well, right where we left off.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So, I'm a little familiar with the promotional process, not the details, but that's where kind of I come in as a barber. A lot of my clients that are trying to promote, obviously they want to look good, so that's where I come in. I'm the guy that they rehearse what they're gonna say.
Right.
And it's quite a process, and I think that more citizens should really take a look at what it's like, just to the degree of oh man, like it's like you guys are put under such a microscope. And you're really, really tested for fitness, right? To make sure that you could do the job, because you're in charge of some very important things that have to do with our community and the benefits of the community and the safety of the community, the crime rate. I mean, there's so many things that are involved. What was your ascension like? Like, what was the most difficult position to get, let's say?
I think making sergeant was both the most difficult for me, as well as the most rewarding. That's kind of your first line supervisor. So, now you're in charge of a shift. And for us, that was anywhere between 10 and 12 officers, depending on what it was.
That are under your oversight as a sergeant. So is that like an average, 10 to 12?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to maintain.
Okay.
or we were at the time.
Okay.
But you're a first line supervisor. So, and I think I took the sergeant's test like 3 times, 3 or 4. And
Why did you have to take it 3 or 4 times? You failed those other times? You didn't score high enough? How does that work?
yeah, I mean, honestly, the first time I took it because these, a bunch of people said you should take the sergeant's test. I didn't study for it. I didn't do any of this stuff. And of course, you go down in flames when that happens, right? And then I took it again and I did okay. And then I think the third time, I was, in a high enough band to where I finally got promoted.
Got it. So that's just for our viewers to understand. So you're taking the test. The test, there's a score, right?
Yes.
That is associated with the test. And then is it they pick from the highest score? Is that how that works as far as who's going to be promoted? Who does the best?
Generally, it works that way. Okay. Our department has what we call a rule of 4. So the 4 candidates, or the top 4 candidates, the chief or whoever's making the decisions can pick from any one of those 4.
Gotcha. So just again for clarification, so when an officer comes in, he comes in as a police officer. He can then promote to detective, is it? Or what goes next? What would be the first promotion of a police officer?
So for us in our department, the way it's structured, becoming a detective or a field training officer is kind of a lateral promotion.
Okay.
So you have more responsibilities, but you don't have you're not designated as a supervisor unless someone says, hey, you're going to be the acting sergeant today, or that kind of thing. Our FTOs, our field training officers, that's your real first exposure to supervising one person, because you're teaching them how to be an officer.
As an FTO, field
Right.
training officer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then after those 2, we have a lot of different specialties, and then you can promote to sergeant. That's your first hard promotion.
Sergeant.
Yeah.
Got it. And then what follows sergeant? Is lieutenant?
It's lieutenant, yes.
And then lieutenant is followed by?
But captain, and then our department's captain, and then chief.
Oh, okay. Wow. So you were just right into the chief. What was that like, working kind of so closely with a decision maker of a department?
Sometimes good, sometimes bad. I was lucky to be a captain for 5 years.
Okay.
And, there are times when everything's running smooth and, there aren't any issues. Obviously, when issues do come up, then, you have to work with the chief in order to make sure that the issues get taken care of, whether it's a personnel issue or manpower or whatever it is. Or like you were saying earlier, specific, crime trends or crime rates in the city. But, for the most part, it was a good team effort.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you ever want to be a chief?
It was never really on my bucket list of things to do. To be honest with you, when I was growing up and I wanted to I started thinking about becoming a police officer, I wanted to do all the cool stuff. So I wanted to, get on the SWAT team. I did that for 20 years. I wanted to be an instructor. So, I trained a lot of different people in different things. I was a field training officer. I was a department trainer in handguns and officer safety, taser instructor, defensive tactics instructor, and all the stuff that I considered cool that I really got my hands around. I wanted to help teach that stuff.
Oh man! So you said you did 20 years as a SWAT. What was your position for the SWAT team?
I started out on way back when it was as a breacher. Worked my way through different spots on the team. Later became a scout, which is kind of on the SWAT team, it's kind of your first level supervisor. They're the ones that are in charge of receiving the mission, putting it together, making sure they do all the reconnaissance, all the planning, all the stuff in preparation for every SWAT mission. And then usually they're the number 1 or 2 person through the door. And for me, that was probably one of the best times in my career.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got to work with not only a bunch of great officers on my department, but I think that's when I really started branching out and meeting officers from other departments, because through working with their SWAT teams. I got to train with all of the guys in the South Bay. We trained with LAPD, we trained with LA Sheriff's SEB, FBI, marshals, a bunch of different people. And, for us, we have a part-time SWAT team, just like probably 98% of the other teams in the area, those were always highlights because, you learn more from training with other people. And, so you can see what the trends are coming up. You can see what the full-time teams are doing and, kind of glean from them and get experience from them. And I think the best part for me was all of that experience translates directly into patrol, which is where I was as a field training officer. And then you take that and you kind of push it out to your shifts, and you just keep that knowledge funnel coming, and putting it out there to everybody, and it just helps to keep guys safe.
Yeah. You did some really cool assignments. Yeah, dangerous, but man, very cool. I have a question for you from Eddie. This will be a good time. His question is, what trait makes a good cop?
What's that?
Boy, Eddie doesn't ask any easy questions. But I think so. There are traits and there are skills, right? So skills are, you shoot well. You're a good detective. You're these things. You're whatever. And then there are traits, the things that make up you as a person. I think for me, the most important trait is that you care. That might sound a little bit idealistic, but when you think about it, if you're truly someone that cares about police work, that means you not only care about, running and gunning and chasing bad guys and catching bad guys and doing all those things, but you care about all the other things that come with it. So you care about not only putting bad guys away, but helping to keep your fellow officers safe. You care about reaching out to the community and kind of, keeping them not only safe, but you keep them informed. You keep them, you have them as part of the puzzle, right? When I first got on way back when, and I'm sure it went on for years and years before, it was always cops and everybody else. And, later on in my career, it became very important for us to do a lot of outreach because we can't do our job if the citizens don't support us.
Right.
And, without that support, whether it's even the little things, obviously they're going to support us through voting for measures that help the police department and getting us funding and doing all those things, right? Because obviously without money, we can't do anything. But they're also going to be there to support us in times of, when we're going through stuff. Toshio's death, for example, we had a major outpouring from just about every club, every organization, every whatever within our city and surrounding cities. And, some places don't get that. And, for us, actually for the department and I think for police work in general, getting back to the original question, you have to care because that kind of expands into everything else that you do.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, caring. Now, and I have a follow-up question to that because community support is so important and vital to, making sure that you do the best job possible. You need their support, like you said. Mm-hmm. Without the community, you can't. Seeing the news and stuff like that, like there are times where certain things come up where you don't have the support of the community and you have the opposite, right? They're against, they want to defund. As an officer that served the community for so long, how does that make you feel?
I get it. There's for a long time there was a separation. Again, it was cops and everybody else, right? And obviously, you're not going to please everyone all the time. Things are going to come up. Cops are human. I don't. I've never doubted that. A lot of people don't believe it because hey, you put the badge on, you become this other person.
You're supposed to be a robot.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, when I first started, I had a friend. I mean, I've known this guy since, God, I think I met him in the 5th grade. And, we were talking, it was right after my graduation from the Sheriff's Academy. You're at this high and everything is going your way. And he calls me and I still remember because it was actually the day that we were having a party to celebrate the graduation. And he called me and, he said, "Hey man, congratulations." And he went through all these things and he said, "Hey, I want you to remember one thing." And I go, "What's that?" He goes, "Don't become a robot." Mm-hmm. And initially I was pissed because he knows me and, he knows how I treat people and how I treated people at the time, and I think deep down inside he knew I wouldn't become that robot, but it was his way of kind of reinforcing, hey man, you got to stay human. You got to make sure that you're still one of the guys at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's tough, man. With they say that being a law enforcement officer is one of the most stressful jobs because there's never any days off. You're always pretty much on. Either you're working a shift, or even when you're off, you're still, you kind of have that deeply entrenched in you that you're always looking for situational dangers, right, and things that may come up, whether you're on duty or not. So, and much more when you're on duty. I mean, you guys really put your lives on the line out there. And where most people leave a scene, say there's a shooting, right? Most people get out of there. You guys go in. So having that, going through all that, what is that like? Like, what is actual police work like for you?
Well, I'll tell you a lot of it. And they don't talk about the parts that aren't cool, when you're becoming a police officer. For every chunk of excitement, you remember there's probably 15 chunks of report writing and documentation and all the other stuff. Obviously, those aren't the things that you promote to get guys and girls on to the police department. I think for the most part, a lot of us get into the business because it's always going to be something different. The guys and girls that I worked with over the years, I don't think any of them thought, well, for the most part, they didn't think that, hey, I'm going to go in today, I'm just going to do my job and I'm going to go home. Some did, and you could tell that through work performance and the way they got along with people and, the level of care that went from here to here, right? Because then that bleeds out into how they treat each other, and then how they treat the public and all these other things. But I think, deep down inside every shift you report to, especially when you're still on patrol, or if you're on a SWAT call out or whatever it is, there's a potential for someone getting hurt. So you just work to try and mitigate and try to keep everyone, yourself and everybody around you, as safe as possible. But yeah, there were times when there was nothing going on and it was absolutely boring, and there were other times where we thought, "Oh my God, what did we get into?"
Yeah, yeah. It's never a dull moment. Right?
Yeah,
that's so true, man. I can only imagine. So let me ask you another question from our co-host Eddie. What is the worst and best day you've had as a police officer? We talked a little bit about your worst day. What's the best day you've ever had?
Best day as a police officer. I'll tell you. So the day I got hired, I went into the police department for my final interview with Chief. At the time, it was Richard Propster. I get called in. We do an interview, and at the very end of the interview, he says, "Hey, we're going to hire you we want you to be a Gardena police officer." Which I'm on cloud 9 right now. But that's not where my day ended. At the time I was working at Sam's Club in Torrance.
Really?
Yeah. I worked there for a few years. But I get back to Sam's Club and my wife called me and says, "Hey, I'm going to go to the doctor real quick. I'm not feeling well. So I just want to, make sure I'm not sick." Okay. Well, later that day, Sam's Club is very close to where our doctor's office was. So she came in while I was still working. And, so I'm on this high because before I went to work, I went into the interview and she comes in and she lets me know that she's pregnant with our son.
Man.
So I think, obviously that's a roller coaster of emotion, right?
Absolutely.
But that will always be, I think, the best day of my journey as a cop.
Oh man, that's awesome! You got a 2-for-1 special. Good news. I mean, the greatest news, right? And how old were you at that time?
I was 25.
25. Yeah. So here you are, about to have a baby. Your family's this is your first one, right?
That was my second.
Oh, this is your second one. Oh, and so now your responsibility is getting heavier, right? And now you got this job that you just got hired. Wow, what a day!
That was great. It was awesome.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that party must have been like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good segue because you are a family man. You've been married for how long have you been married to Candy?
We're going on 34 years.
34 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Resilient woman.
She's probably the most patient woman I know. So, yeah.
That's good. Yeah, we need that patience, right?
Oh, yeah.
Whenever our support group, definitely patience is key. So being that you were married for 34 years, what kind of husband would you say you are?
I'm probably average. I think
Really? As a captain?
well,
I mean, come on.
well, hey, I'll tell you. So that whole rank thing stops when you go home. My mom would, when she came to all of my promotions, right? And at each promotion, let's say when I got promoted to lieutenant, right? My mom, said, "Hey, congratulations," and we're so proud of you, all these things. But at the same time, she would look over at Candy and say, "Well, he's a lieutenant now. That makes you a captain."
Wow.
Right? And and that's my mom's way of keeping me based, right? Keeping me in line.
Grounded,
Yeah, grounded, exactly. But I try to do the things that obviously keep us together. A lot of people say, one of the things I really dislike, well, maybe not dislike, but it kind of bothers me when people say, "Oh my God, you've been married for so long, you're so lucky," right? Luck had nothing to do with it. If you're going to be with whoever it is for that long, it takes work. It takes it takes a lot of compromise. Sometimes it's back and forth. You're going to fight. I had a friend who got divorced, and he told me, he goes, I don't understand why we're getting divorced, because we never fight. And I looked at him, I said, I think you have to once in a while, because nothing's perfect, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to have your ups and downs, and you have to learn your boundaries and all those things. But yeah, it takes a lot of work. I think, although I don't like it when people say I am lucky, I think I have been lucky. It's just I took some of that luck and we continue to work at it.
Yeah, definitely. And you have how many kids you have?
We have 3.
3 kids. Yeah. Oh, nice. Which one's your favorite?
I can't answer that question.
It was a trick question. Yeah. I had to throw a curveball.
They're all my favorite for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So my kids are 36, 30, and 25. If you do the math, you can see we've been, that first baby can come at any time, right? And then the other ones come when they're planned, right?
Yeah.
But each one of the kids is awesome. They've all got different skills, and people talk about legacies and building stuff, and want to have their names on a building or whatever, right? Whenever I hear that, I always think to myself, my legacy is the fact that my wife and I have been able to raise 3 great kids. Not just because they're our kids, but because they're good people. And, that to us, that was the most important thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I threw that out there because that's I raise kids too, and that's what they typically think. Oh, you have a favorite. We really don't. As parents, we love them all, the same. But yeah, definitely you have to make adjustments as a parent because they all have individual personalities.
Oh yeah.
Which one reminds you more of you, the most of you? Who's more like you, I should say?
More like me?
Mm-hmm. But
that's a great question. They're all, I think, all very much like me. In fact, my oldest and my youngest, actually all 3 of them wanted to be cops at some point in their careers or in their lifetimes, but they went different routes, which is fine. This is great. They all have a little piece of me, in them. I think my youngest son, Brandon, when we heard him talking with a friend of his, or with a friend of ours actually, and he's a nurse now, just like his big sister, and they asked, well, why did you want to get into this and all these other things, and I've heard all the different explanations when people talk about why they get into different businesses or careers. And, you know, he looked her dead in the eye. He didn't look at us. He didn't know we were listening. And he just said, you know, I really like helping people. And, you know, as a parent hearing that, it just, you know, it takes your pride level and just drives it up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, you're a father of 3. How would you describe yourself as a dad?
So I was raised in the old fashioned way, really hard, right? You know, my dad's a Filipino, and he raised us in, you know, traditional Filipino way. I was told myself I wasn't going to do that, and that I wasn't going to be, you know, just this domineering dad or whatever it was. But I think I just wanted to be an example to my kids. You know, so I wanted them to learn how to do things right, how to treat people right. And so I try to do that through everything that I do with them, you know, whether it was coaching them on their teams, or, you know, taking them to martial arts practice, or doing whatever. You know, we never pushed them into anything that they didn't want to do, but we supported everything that they wanted to do. And I just wanted to be that dad that was supportive and, you know, there when they needed. And, you know, hopefully I'm still there when they need me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, they say it takes a village, right, to raise a family, to raise your kids. Who would you say was your village? Who supported your family endeavors the most, that kind of makes you feel like so grateful that you had that support, aside from your wife?
So I kind of have to include her in it, because so we both went to Bishop Montgomery High School.
Okay.
And she was a year after me. So we have a lot of the same friends. But and it's funny you bring that up, because we just saw this group of people last week. And we have a group of people that they went to school with us, and we've been tight since high school. We all used to live together, or not together, but in the same area, and they're very close to each other. And now we're kind of separate. But those people are, you know, family that became, or friends that became family. And, you know, our kids are around the same ages. Our kids are really tight. You know, they were there for us. We always tried to be there for them when, you know, good times, bad times, you know, whatever. But I think them, that small circle of people and then of course my brothers and their families, and my mom and dad, and, you know, my mother-in-law, we're all part of this big thing, you know, that we call the village, right? And, you know, I think without them, we wouldn't have, or we might have come out a little bit different.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely. No, we're always grateful to those people who show up every day as that support group or that village to help our families out.
Right.
Because it gives us, like, a lot of times I think that our kids, it's important because our kids, we're constantly instructing them, right? And a lot of times they could possibly tune out. So they need someone else that could tell them the same thing. But when they hear it from another friend, you know, maybe a family friend, they start incorporating in that. It's funny how that works out.
Yeah.
I never understood it, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you hear your child tell you the exact same thing that someone else told you, when you're like, I told you that earlier.
Exactly.
You didn't listen. Why you listen to him? It's funny how that works out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see, you know, that family is very important to you, and it really shows how you were able to reach this levels of success. You know, becoming a captain, retiring, living really well after your retirement. You know, anytime you have a smile on your face, you still look youthful. You got all this hair, bro. You did good, man. So I just wanted to kind of showcase and tell people kind of a little bit about who you are and what makes you who you are. And obviously, family is a huge part of what makes you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So we wanted to, you know, change the title a little bit. Now, you've been retired now for how long?
I think I'm going on 15 months.
15 months.
Yeah.
Very recent. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So how do you like it so far?
Oh, it's great. It's the best club ever.
Yeah,
You know.
retirement club.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I get it. You know, people hear the word retirement, you know, they start picturing you maybe on the couch in a robe, you know, binging on South Bay Connects, eating your grapes, right?
Yeah.
But what is the reality of your retirement? What are you doing nowadays?
So just before I retired, we were thinking about, hey, what's the next step? I think that's very important for guys and girls who are getting ready to retire. I've seen plenty of people that retired and didn't have a plan, and they just kind of disappear, and they don't last in retirement. So we didn't want that to happen. And you were thinking, obviously we were going to do all the things like, obviously, there was a lot of catching up for myself and my wife because, we spend so much time working and doing all those things. We're going to travel. We're going to do all the stuff that you're supposed to do in retirement. And we did a lot of that initially. But just before I retired, I started teaching and consulting. And it was one of those things that came up in a conversation with my wife. We were thinking, well, we should open some type of business or whatever. And I was racking my brain. Well, what are we going to do? We didn't have a product to sell. We didn't have things that we made or any of that kind of stuff. And my wife looks at me and she goes, so you're telling me you're going to take all this knowledge and experience that you have, that you've attained over the last 30 years and just put it on the bookshelf while we go travel and while we do these things. And I go, what are you talking about? She says, well, you need to continue teaching the stuff that because the general public, the people that we consider friends and family and people that we live around, they don't know everything that you do. And it just kind of hit because, I was already teaching active shooter stuff for our department. And that actually ended up being one of the bigger draws when we were doing our community engagement series. So I kind of expanded on that and started teaching about situational awareness, safety, just different things to make people think about, how to stay safe while they're out and about.
And you formed a company, correct?
Yes.
What's your company name, please?
So it's called Shield Assets.
Okay.
And the main goal of the company is to, teach people to be safe. Obviously I do, I teach everything from, situational awareness to active shooter response. I also, teach basic handgun if, people want to learn that. That actually helps me because it helps me retain my skills with, firearms and things. And then part of that also expanded. So I'm actually working with another company called Daily Strategic. And through Daily, we're teaching police officers, both federal and state and local, and also security guards and private citizens about safety, security, and things like that.
Nice. Now, I have another question from Eddie. What do most people get wrong about personal safety?
Again, Eddie doesn't ask any easy ones, man. I think what people get wrong is mindset. So we live in I'll say it, we live in the greatest country on the planet. And, we're all lucky to be here. So, but along with living here, we have a level of safety that we're kind of used to, right? So a lot of people develop this mindset of, oh, it'll never happen here. So when you have that mindset, that expands into, I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about learning self-defense or first aid or anything else or how to respond to an active shooter because it's not going to happen here. And if it does, someone's going to take care of it. But that puts you into this false sense of safety. So when, if you're living in that mindset, when it does happen, you're not going to have a plan and you're not going to know how to respond to it.
Yeah, that's very true. That your response actually leads to a really good another question from Eddie. It says, if someone wants to be more prepared, where should they start?
So everything, I've always believed that everything starts with you, right? Like when you're on an airplane and they give you your safety brief, what does the pilot say when the gas or the oxygen masks fall down? What are you supposed to do?
You put it on yourself first.
Right. You help yourself before you help your kids or your husband or wife or whoever's next to you, right?
Correct.
So I've always believed that you gotta start with you. Well, and obviously that's going to be different things like staying healthy, getting physical activity, because obviously if you can't do something as simple as walk, you're not going to be able to extract yourself from a bad situation or move yourself when you see a bad guy coming towards you, right? Maintain physical fitness, whether it's running or lifting weights or doing whatever, or a great combination. That moves into, I always suggest that you learn some type of self-defense. And I've never pushed a preference on anybody, but I've always cautioned people to, kind of stay away from, anything that I guess you could say flowery or fancy, right? Learn something that's bare bones basics, something that you're going to retain. And, that way when the poo-poo hits the fan, you'll be able to use it, and then, other things like learning first aid, learning how to, learning what situational awareness really is. And then, obviously, I don't want people to be paranoid, but you want them to be vigilant,
Absolutely. Those are good. That's good advice, because a lot of times we find ourselves we don't even think about it. Like you said, the mindset, that's key. If you're minding what you're supposed to be looking for, or you're paying closer attention, then you don't get caught off guard as much.
Right.
So is that kind of the strategy to always kind of be on guard to some degree?
Yeah. Like I said, you don't want to be paranoid, but you do want to be vigilant. What the fancy term is keeping your head on a swivel, right? So, just pay attention to what's going on around you. Everybody's got one of these, right? I always tell in my classes, I always say it's the best thing that ever happened to us, but it's the worst thing that's also happened to us. You can take meetings, you can, see what's going on with your stocks, you can, see what's on Instagram, you can do all these things, right? Which is awesome. But then you become focused on the phone and you lose what's going on around you. So, pay attention. I would tell people when you're at the mall or whatever it is, whatever's on your phone is going to wait till you get done doing what you're doing. You need to pay attention to what's going on around you. Put the phone in your pocket and, do your shopping, do your eating, do whatever it is, and get back engaged with whoever you're with, and, pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah, that's really valuable information, because it's true. Our phones we're always paying attention to our phone, and so it's like a distraction. And you see it more and more. People walk down the street looking at their phone.
Oh, yeah.
Not even looking up, literally just engaged on their phone. So
right.
I could see how that someone like that's distracted could be a potential target for somebody who perhaps wants to rob them or sneak up on them. So yeah, very good, very good. Let me ask you something else. So if somebody wanted to take one of your classes, let's say a self-defense class, how do they go about reaching out to your company? What would you please let us know where we could go? Do you have a website?
Yeah. So my website is, let me get this right. It's www.shieldassetsllc.com.
In today's world, safety isn't something you leave to chance. It's something you prepare for. After decades of serving the community and law enforcement, the mission continues. Shield Assets LLC provides professional safety training, security consulting, and real-world situational awareness for individuals, families, and businesses. Preparation isn't fear, it's responsibility. Shield Assets, LLC.com.
And then, through the website, you can contact me. And, like you were saying, I do teach self-defense and, basic firearms, and along with all the other stuff. But I also teach, and I actually have to get back in there a little more often, at IMB Academy in Carson. And that's www.imbacademy.com. It's a martial arts studio that was founded by Richard Bustillo, who was my original instructor there. He passed away in 2017. But, interesting, note about the school, we it's a mix of different martial arts. We teach Filipino martial arts. We teach, there's jiu-jitsu there, boxing, kickboxing, and a few other things. There's even a judo class there now. But our original instructor, Sigung Richard, was one of Bruce Lee's Chinatown students way back when. So, wow. It's always cool to remember that, hey, you're kind of in this lineage.
Yeah.
But, again, I don't push any of our stuff on anybody. I always tell people, you have to take someone that or something that you're interested in, number one, and something that you're going to go out and you're going to actively make your way to practice. Because a lot of people go to martial arts lessons or self-defense lessons for a little bit, and then they kind of back off because, hey, I learned a lot of stuff. Then you don't practice it. So again, when the poo-poo hits the fan, you don't remember half the techniques. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to keep those that muscle memory going, right?
Yes.
Keep doing it.
Yep.
It's not just a one-time deal. One class is not going to help you.
Right. Exactly.
It can to some degree, but like you said, when it hits the fan, you'll probably forget.
Yep.
Man, that's crazy. I also saw you doing some teaching the kind of seniors how to do self-defense as well.
Right. So I've been lucky enough to been affiliated with a group called Seniors Fight Back, and that was founded by Hong Lee. And actually, it's as a result of a hate crime that happened to her during COVID. She was verbally accosted by a guy in a restaurant who was telling her to go back to her own country and all these things, and that incident kind of went viral. But she didn't curl up in the ball and hide. What she did was she decided, hey, we need to be able to teach people how to protect themselves or get themselves out of these types of situations. So she thought about it and then put together a team, which I joined in probably about 2022. And it initially was seniors, hence the name Seniors Fight Back, teaching people how to again, situational awareness, how to get out of situations or identify situations and then get out of them, or ultimately how to protect yourself with a few basic techniques that we teach and hopefully they retain. So she's done really well with that organization, and I've been with them since 2022. And it's been a blast. I think we've taught something like 10,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And all of these lessons are free. We do them through civic groups, through city groups, and other things.
How often do you guys get together?
We try to do. I think we're trying to do once a quarter.
Okay.
So we recently.
Is there a specific place that you go to?
No, we go from city to city.
Oh, okay.
Last year, I think the last one we did was in Compton at a church. We've done City of Gardena, the botanical gardens down in South Bay.
Yeah.
All over the place.
No, I remember that. Yeah, okay. That's cool. And also you teach classes for self-defense for women too, correct? Or how is that? What's your affiliation with that?
Well, that's kind of through IMB Academy.
Okay.
I recently did a self-defense seminar as a fundraiser for my wife's hula group. They're Halau, Illinois, out of Carson, and this is I think the 40th anniversary of their Halau, which is their school, going to Hilo and competing in what's called the Merry Monarch Festival, and part of that festival is this huge hula competition, it's basically the Olympics of hula. So, we did a seminar to help raise funds to help them get there.
Wow. Man. So in retirement, you're still continuing to lead, huh? Still helping the community. Oh man, that's excellent. I'm so glad that you listened to your wife, Candy, and took all that knowledge off of the shelf and share it with the South Bay, because it's getting crazy out here, man. It really is. And I think that, thank you for coming on to our podcast. We definitely wanted to show the South Bay just how much value you have, and you're one member in the South Bay that's done some incredible things and continues to.
Thank you.
And you've protected the community for so many years, and you're still doing it. You're still doing it. So that shows that you didn't do it just for pay. You do it for the love of human and community, and of course your family is raised in that community. I wanted to say something in conclusion. I wanted to ask you, because things are getting so crazy, what piece of advice would you give to the South Bay? What do you want them to understand with all the things that we see going around, with crime, being more, with all this stuff going on with the war and all the threats that we hear on the news about Iran and all these drones, and stuff can get scary. And what kind of advice would you give the community?
I think that's a huge question, right? I think it all boils down to a couple of simple concepts. One more time, you got to remain vigilant. Don't be paranoid, but watch what's going on around you. Listen to, human beings are part of this whole big animal planet, right? But we're the only animals on the planet that turn off our intuition, right? When your spider sense goes off, and or that gut feeling hits you, that's your body and your mind telling you there's something wrong in this situation. We're the only ones on the planet that go, it'll be fine. When you hear something, when you're at home and you hear something in the middle of the night fall over and crash, it'll be fine. It's okay. It's probably a burglar, might be the cat or whatever it is, but we're the only ones that say, I'm not going to worry about it. You can't live like that. And you can't live with a mindset of, this will never happen here, or this will never happen to me. So, I always tell people, again, watch what's going on around you. Pay attention to the people that are around you, make eye contact, do all these things to, make yourself less of a victim. And then in addition to, just maintaining your situational awareness, make yourself an asset and not a liability for, again, when the bad stuff happens. Keep yourself in good physical shape. Teach your kids and your family to do the same. Get some basic training in first aid, CPR or whatever. You're never going to know when you'll need it. And you can always, if you have a good background in first aid, you can help the kid that fell down and scraped their knee, or you can help out, after an active shooter, would stop the bleed and doing all those things. And then I think finally, find some type of self-defense or a martial art that you can train in. That helps with physical fitness. That helps with, self-protection and you protecting your families and, whoever's with you. But you have to have that full combination, I think, in order to, and this is obviously for me, in order to feel safe and confident when you're out and about.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much. Now, that's for our community. Within that community, there's a lot of businesses, and we noticed lately that more and more businesses are being robbed. More and more people are being affected by that. What advice would you give a business owner as to a better way to protect not just his business, his patrons, and his employees?
I think all those same concepts go towards protecting your business. Whether it's a storefront, jewelry shop or restaurant or whatever it is, you have to harden yourself as a target. So obviously late at night, we used to tell this to the businesses in Gardena, don't leave cash in your registers overnight. I know it's easier to come in and you open up and there's your basic drawer of cash so you can start serving right away. Lock that stuff up or take it and deposit it. Don't set yourself up in patterns that someone can clearly watch and identify. If you're doing your deposits every day at 3 p.m. or every Tuesday at 3 p.m., someone's going to figure that out. And they're going to figure out, okay, and they know that you go to whatever bank, they're going to follow you to the bank and you're going to get robbed. I recently helped a big business here in the South Bay, and we went over all of their security protocols, and a lot of those concepts were discussed with them. I asked, when are your deposits? When do you do this? Who's monitoring your cameras and whatever. So we went down a full checklist of, things that they could improve, some things they were doing great, not so great, and then they absolutely had to improve. But always think about what you can fix and what you can do a little bit better. And, maybe ask questions from your neighbor businesses, because, you don't come up with all of the best ideas on your own. We get them from other people, right? When you share information, because they may have a nugget of safety or security that, you're maybe not using yet. A lot of people have cameras, and having cameras is great for after the fact. But if you're relying on those cameras to keep you safe up to and in that situation, it's a little different, because a lot of people have the camera and no one to monitor the camera, right? So, without some active monitoring, you're not going to know that the place is being robbed, or undesirables have come in, or, or whatever, right? So you have to think about when you have tools like that, not only having the tools, but how are you going to deploy the tools, and who are you going to have responsible for running the tools.
Man. Yeah, a lot goes into it, huh, to maintaining a safe environment. Now, let me ask you a little wrinkled question. I know we're in the final part of our episode here, but so in the event that somebody does come into a place of business, let's say an armed robber comes into the place, it's a whatever restaurant, barbershop, whatever it is. What advice would you give the patrons and the owner of that establishment in that situation?
I think in most cases, if someone's coming in to rob a place, and do a takeover or whatever it is, your best bet, I think, is probably to go along with what they're doing. Cooperate with them. You can get money back, you can get credit cards back, ID, all those different things, right? But you can't get you back if they decide that, what, Eli's not going with my program, I'm just going to shoot Eli or whatever. But with that, if you're in a situation and, it starts to go south from, already being bad where they're robbing you, if there's something in your head that says, or that shows you that this bad guy is not going to, just walk away after they take your money and your belongings and all these other things, it's time to fight. It's time to get out, or it's time to fight. Especially if they decide, Eli, you're coming with me, right? When crimes happen, and I don't know the exact stats, but if you're the victim of a crime, and whoever is involved in committing that crime decides they're going to take you away, there's a very high percentage that you're not coming back. So you have to keep that in mind. If if they start shooting, or if they start, escalating, you may have to take, some action in order to protect yourselves and other people around you. And again, not everybody needs to be a hero, but there are going to be times, there may be a time when you have to take a step towards the bad guy and, either distract them, through loud noises or whatever it is, or actually fight with them in order to, get their weapon away or get control of the weapon. It's not the first thing I would suggest to you, but again, if all of your intuition is, and whatever they're doing is showing you that, hey, this bad guy is going to escalate this and he's going to start killing people, then you absolutely have to protect yourself.
Absolutely, man. There's just so much that goes into protecting ourselves, and we're so grateful, Vince, for you to come here and share that wealth of information with our community. We definitely want to encourage our South Bay community to reach out to you, your company, so that if they are interested, whether it's a company or individuals, to get more acquainted with self-defense. I'm so grateful that we're introducing you to our South Bay community so that they can see, through and through what kind of a man you are. You've been a leader your whole life. You've been an excellent husband and an amazing father. And the proof is in the pudding. Your kids are the receipts. Your family's the receipts. Your lifestyle is the receipts. And everything that you do for the community is you're really a prime example of more people to imitate what you do. So thank you very much, Vince. This has been fun. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully I didn't throw you off too much. That's our show, you guys. Hope you enjoyed it.